The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks might be one of the most unique games in the entire Zelda series. So with the critical and commercial success of Phantom Hourglass and the 3DS still being a couple years on the horizon, Nintendo saw fit to make a sequel to their DS Zelda entry. Now, Nintendo is no stranger to repurposing an existing engine and assets to make something a little more original. Just take a look at the phenomenal work that they did going from Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask, or to a slightly lesser extent, Link's Awakening to the Oracle games. These games really relied on using on what Nintendo already had on hand, plus some scrapped ideas that they couldn't fully implement with the earlier games. Majora's Mask had this experimental time travel mechanic and transformation masks. The Oracle games had an interconnecting story that relied on playing both games to have the full experience. And then Spirit Tracks comes along and it was essentially Phantom Hourglass, but with trains instead of boats. Which I remember some really interesting discourse when Spirit Tracks was initially being shown off, as people thought the trains were kind of out of place. Yeah, a mechanical goat robot or reusing Mario enemies is fine, but having Link ride a train, now that's just going too far. I liked the idea of the whole train personally, but the thing that I was not prepared for was how much I was going to like this game's story, or how well this game looks for a DS title, or the incredibly surprising soundtrack. If there was an award for which Zelda game flew under the highest amount of people's radar, Spirit Tracks would honestly have a pretty strong case for being in that #1 spot. This is a game that I think is a tad bit on the underrated side for many of the reasons I already listed, but you know, at the same time, I can't say that I love this game like I do with many of the other Zelda games. While Spirit Tracks does do plenty of things well, it still has some of those holdovers from Phantom Hourglass that not only was I not a big fan of in that game, in some ways, they actually show up a bit worse here. And while there are some new ideas put into play, most of them really don't pan out, and the things that are Zelda staples are kind of inferior from what we saw in earlier games. And while the story is enjoyable with some really great renditions of a few characters that I really loved, I still wouldn't say it competes with Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, or Twilight Princess. This puts Spirit Tracks in a bit of an awkward position where it's a perfectly solid and slightly underrated game by its own merits, but when compared to what we've seen with the rest of the series, I can't help but feel that it's a little bit lacking, you know? I said something very similar to that in my Phantom Hourglass video. While I think Spirit Tracks is a superior game between the two, many of these upgrades were more on the incremental side than anything else. If Phantom Hourglass was a 7 out of 10, then Spirit Tracks isn't as much of an 8 as it is like a 7.1. Which, you know, an improvement is an improvement. However, I can't help but feel like Nintendo could have done a little bit more here, even if what is here is still pretty solid. Spirit Tracks acts as a sequel to Phantom Hourglass, which was already a sequel to the Wind Waker, making these three games some of the closest together when it comes to timeline placement. This time around, we don't actually take control of the same Link from before, but instead one a few generations removed from the events of the previous games. In this new kingdom, appropriately titled New Hyrule, we see the return to a much more familiar setting compared to some of the seafaring adventures that we had before. Only difference this time around is that the people of New Hyrule are a bit more technologically advanced, having developed a steam train system that can be used to ride the Spirit Tracks around the land for navigation. But those tracks also hold the purpose of binding an ancient evil being named Malladus inside of the earth. And as luck would have it, on the day of this new Link's coronation as a train conductor, disaster would strike as Link and Zelda try to leave Hyrule Castle together, only to be stopped by Chancellor Cole and his accomplice Byrne. Together, they remove Zelda's spirit from her body to use as a vessel for Malladus and knock Link unconscious. Link finds himself woken up inside of Hyrule Castle and reconvenes with what is essentially Zelda's ghost as they team up to try and find a way to stop Malladus' resurrection and reclaim Zelda's body. It's a fun kind of spin on the whole save the princess shtick that you've no doubt seen in other games in the series. And honestly, it's the primary thing that I think really props this game's story up. This time around, Zelda is our companion character, and she is just fantastic. She is so funny, so charismatic, so adorable, and goes through a unique arc of learning to be a more self-sufficient and capable person that not too many other Zeldas in the franchise have even come close to doing. This version of Zelda starts off beside herself because of the fact that she needs to assist Link in saving the day. It's just not the thing that princesses do, her words, not mine. But Zelda really proves herself to be very useful, and you get this real sense that she feels accomplished when she works together with Link through their numerous conversations and interactions. She really makes the story here, and I know the past few videos I've gushed a lot about the companion characters, but Zelda is legitimately up there this time around. I mean, how could she not be? The rest of the story is just perfectly fine. Burn makes for a fun sort of lackey that has his own arc, and Gene very much gives some Impa energy, and we even get some fun cameos from Phantom Hourglass and Wind Waker too. Our main villain Maladus is pretty one note, really only being spoken of for the most part, and their imminent return doesn't really make the game world feel any different, if you know what I'm saying. And Chancellor Cole is an evil little gremlin piece of shit, sure, but you learn that in the first 5 minutes of the game, and that's basically all you get with him. When it's all said and done, it's a mostly by-the-numbers Zelda plot that is elevated to a slightly above average category thanks to one of the strongest portrayals of Zelda in the entire series. Debatably the best at the time of this game's release, depending on who you ask, too. Even if the main villain is a bit on the dull side and the narrative is predictable, the game story itself is still pretty enjoyable. I think it's because the writing once again retains that level of humor that the Zelda series has been very big on, especially with the more cartoony entries. And you know, the story is also really propped up by the presentation in general. Now, don't get me wrong. This game reuses a lot from Phantom Hourglass asset-wise, and with the DS's technical limitations, you are going to see a lot of jagged edges and pop in for far-off objects on the train, but for the most part, I think this game looks great for the hardware. The train rides are filled with so much more color and interesting landmarks than the blue flat oceans from Phantom Hourglass. The environment variety is so much more diverse, and I honestly think a lot of the cinematography in the cutscenes is a bit better too. And then there's the music. Goddamn, man, this soundtrack is fucking massive. This can definitely compete with the 3D games in terms of sheer volume, but I'd be lying if I said that it was held up to the same level of quality. You're gonna hear some things that you heard before in Phantom Hourglass and other Zelda games, but the original pieces, I think, are really damn good. Personal highlight for me being the overworld theme here. Like, this really gets your blood pumping. It's so jovial, and you just really want to ride that train, cause, you know, the music is awesome. Yeah. So you hop on the tracks, see the expanses of New Hyrule laid before you, you have that banging music play, and you're ready to take control of the train, and it's okay, but it's definitely not as intuitive as the boat from Phantom Hourglass. This reason should be pretty obvious for anyone who's ever seen a train before. You are locked onto the tracks with the only options being moving forwards, backwards, or doing the occasional track switch. Yes, we went from having 360 degrees of movement across an entire ocean to a choice of 2 directions, and having played these games back to back, you really feel that limitation start to bite you in the ass. Now, of course, this just comes with the whole fantasy of riding a train, right? Obviously, we aren't going to get some omnidirectional train for you to drive because it really wouldn't even be a train at that point. So this is either going to be something that you're fine with because you like the idea, or if you're like me, you're going to find it to be a lesser version of something we had in the previous game. So with you being on rails both literally and metaphorically, what does Spirit Tracks do to spice up things on your treks across New Hyrule? Well, honestly, not too much. Just like Phantom Hourglass, you will still use the bottom screen to draw your route out before you set off, you'll shoot enemies with your cannon, and then you'll see the occasional shop or NPC on the way to your destination. Along the way, you'll notice that we do have a bit of a new control scheme to play with, but for the most part, it really doesn't amount to too much. You have what is essentially a gear shift, but outside of occasionally needing to stop at train stations, there really isn't any reason that you shouldn't have the speed cranked up to max for like 95% of the game. Then you have your horn, which outside of the occasional enemy that you need to use this on in order to hit, or random objectives that you need to do, it's mainly just there for aesthetics. Actually controlling the train is honestly a little bit on the boring side. Like, just the process from getting to point A to point B can take several minutes, and the time you spend on the train really isn't that engaging. You do get some fast travel options a little bit later in the game, but it requires you going through these gates that are sort of out of the way, and unless you're doing a bunch of side content, I don't think you're really saving too much time here by going through them. The most you're really doing on the train is occasionally shooting enemies with the cannon, which these come up just frequently enough that it's not like you can put your DS down and look at your phone. You need to be engaged just enough to make sure you don't die. And if you still somehow manage to pay half attention to your trek, be prepared to sometimes hear this music. These are where the bullet trains come in, which will instantly destroy your train upon contact. The map will do a good job of telegraphing where these trains are going, so they're easily avoidable, but if you make the wrong turn, you are in some seriously deep shit. This might actually be one of the most anxiety-inducing bits in any Zelda game, as you try desperately to get away from these things. But thankfully a little bit later in the game, you do get your revenge, and it's pretty satisfying. As the game goes on, Spirit Tracks starts to introduce new occasional objectives, such as bringing passengers to different train stations and transporting cargo. The passenger transportation is more or less a game of Simon Says, as you must keep your satisfaction level high by following the instructions on nearby signs, all the while not getting hit by enemies or using your emergency brake too much. The cargo transportation is also just delivery of something to a location that is timed, with a timer decreasing upon taking damage. These are fine, you only do them a couple times in the main story, and you do a bit more of them during the side quests, which this game has a plentiful amount of. In addition to the passenger and cargo transportation, you've got rabbits and stamps to collect, which they're not super interesting, they're just sort of fine, far from the best thing that the series has ever seen. As you do these side quests, you will also unlock more tracks around the map that are mainly used for more side objectives, but you can also change up your route a little bit too if that's your thing. I didn't really go after these too much since it seemed it was just like doing optional content to unlock more optional content, and none of it was really that particularly interesting. But it is there if you're looking for more stuff to do, I suppose. So the terrain isn't bad, and if you're really into the whole idea of having Link be a conductor, this is a perfectly fine gimmick. For me though, I just really felt like it was a more limiting and less fun version of the boat from Phantom Hourglass. And the new side minigames or obstacles that they added to keep things interesting were either boring, anxiety-inducing, or really not that remarkable to begin with. Personal preference here, because I know a lot of people like this part of the game, but it just didn't really work for me. This was just a tad bit on the boring side. Being that Spirit Tracks is a direct sequel to Phantom Hourglass, built with the same engine, you could reasonably assume that Spirit Tracks plays mostly the same. And yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair statement to make. The game plays 99% the same in all honesty. That is to say, if you like the controls in Phantom Hourglass, you will probably like them in Spirit Tracks too. And while I didn't hate the touchscreen controls, I have to say after playing both of these games back to back, I think this would have just been a little bit better with a more traditional control scheme, because these things really started to grate on me after a while. This mainly comes with two things, the flute and controlling the Phantom. Let's talk about the one that I dislike most first with the flute. So this is the first time since the Wind Waker that we've had a fully controllable instrument to play with, and no, I don't count the Halloween Stones from Twilight Princess. You use the flute very similarly to how you would use the Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker by playing a sequence of notes to cause various effects whenever the situation calls for it. This time around though, you will use the touchscreen to select a particular note while blowing to the DS microphone to play said note. And for the most part, this is okay, but you do occasionally have these segments in the game where you need to perform a piece of music with another NPC, and to put it bluntly, these things just straight up don't work as well as they should. You will need to play a portion of a song, but you get no feedback if you played a note too early or too late, which, you know, basically every other rhythm game in existence does for you. And this is a big problem because you also have to deal with the fact that the DS's microphone is just finicky as hell and will sometimes take irregular blowing as two different inputs, which will cause you to fail these segments. Yeah, one incorrect note will cause you to lose, and you won't even know that it happened until you get to the end and the NPC tells you to get good and try again. Easily the most frustrating part of the game for me. The tech was just not here for this. The other gripe that I have with the touch controls, and this is a much more minor one, is with the pathing of the Phantom. My really only complaint here is that it will oftentimes get stuck on collision or not really know how to attack enemies you want it to target. Which, you know, you could probably make the case for the AI being more of an issue than the touch controls itself, but whatever. Other than that, I think the Phantom system is a really fun addition to the game when you get the chance to use it. But when do you actually get to use it, you might be wondering. So, much like Phantom Hourglass, in between the major temples, you will return back to this mega dungeon to complete bits and pieces throughout the game. Now, get this. This time around, there is no time limit, you don't have to repeat sections of the same levels, and the temple is in the exact middle of the map, making it a little easier to get to. And most importantly, the gimmick inside of the temple is actually fun. You essentially need to collect 3 light tears, and then by stabbing a phantom in the back, you can have Zelda take control of their body to do various things such as help you open doors, reach higher platforms, light passageways, things of that nature. The phantoms can't do everything though, so Link will still need to cross sand that they would sink in, or, you know, Zelda is the one that's still technically inhabiting that body, so when she sees a rat, she essentially gets paralyzed with fear. This game does an excellent job of setting this mechanic up too, with Link having to lead Zelda around through a courtyard who she's mostly helpless during this time, but everything gets subverted inside of the Tower of Spirits in such a cool and unique way. That and this whole mechanic almost makes the dungeon feel like a cooperative experience in a way that is honestly a bit better than most of the other cooperative Zelda games. The world design retains that flatness that I mentioned before in my Phantom Hourglass video, but we do get a little bit more variety in the environment overall. It's a bit more Mario platformer-esque with these tropes. We get a forest level, a snow level, a water level, a fire level, a desert level. You get the picture. I definitely don't dislike it. Actually, these radically different environments being in the inner cardinal directions of the map kind of remind me of Majora's Mask in a way, which hey, anything that can make me think of that game definitely gets some kudos from me. The rest of the game is your pretty bog standard Zelda affairs, and if I'm being honest, everything is just perfectly average, with not much really separating itself from any other Zelda game. The dungeons have some decent-ish puzzles, but they're very linear and honestly on the shorter side of things too. The enemies are more plentiful in variety compared to Phantom Hourglass, but for the most part, aren't really anything you've never seen before. The bosses, while a spectacle given that many of them utilize the dual screen, are again solid, but nothing too spectacular. The items are a bit of a mixed bag, with the whip being a decent new addition, the whirlwind requiring each use to have the player blow into the microphone, which gets old very quickly, and the sand wand just being really annoying to use. The side objectives give you mostly the same rewards, while having you collect dozens of MacGuffins including stamps, rabbits, random treasures, train cars, and heart containers. You've done a lot of this stuff before, and unfortunately, Spirit Tracks really doesn't do too much new or anything really remarkable to stand out in these areas. And it's because of that this game does kind of feel by the numbers when compared to earlier games in the series. If it sounds like I'm being a little jaded towards Spirit Tracks, let me remind you guys that the average Zelda game is still better than like 85 to 90% of video games out there, so none of the things that I mentioned earlier are even close to being bad, just purely my preference. Except for maybe the flute, that actually just fucking sucks, but still. Spirit Tracks is undoubtedly a fine game, but it very much feels like a case that some of the things that people love most about the series are a little by the numbers here, which ultimately leaves me feeling like I enjoyed what I played, but I'm not screaming from the rooftops that every single person needs to give this game a try. It's a good, solid 10-hour adventure that has some fun music, a surprisingly good story with great characters, strong improvements over the previous game, and some interesting gimmicks that don't all 100% stick their landing, but the majority of them do. If you remember not liking this game, I don't think there's anything here that is remarkable enough to change your mind if one of those main components didn't click with you, if I'm being fully honest. Still, Spirit Tracks gets a solid recommendation from me for anyone who hasn't given the game a try before, or is maybe looking for a little bit of a refresh on their memory. Yeah, it's probably near the lower end of the Zelda games, but to me, it's still a pretty enjoyable game throughout, even if it has some minor things that I think could have been a little bit better.